that happens to be one of my passions. And I spend the better part of every day wrestling with some of the most intractable problems in society around race and ethnicity at the intersection of media. So whenever I get a chance to pull away from that and just gather together with people who want to talk about writing, because we just want to talk about writing, it's a really good day for me. So I'm really happy to be here to do that today. I'm going to read some remarks to you first, and then follow that with a conversation with you. I want to focus a little bit on personal writing, and at Scarlett's direction, I tried to think about what the power of the tool is, and I'll talk some about that. So here goes. We live our lives in moments, small cosmic increments built one upon the other, like breaths, like heartbeats. Each moment fuses with the last and is influenced and changed by all the others that come before it, like cells from the body and the brain and the mind and the memory that holds the moment here inside you for constant re-examination, reframing, for remembering. To the writer, these moments are like words in a sentence, independent and holding their own integrity, but given depth and meaning by the context in which they fall, by all the words around them. I can't tell you how many times I've been rescued from the tyranny of the blank page by the realization that every essay, every personal essay idea has an origin story born of a moment. And if I can just trust the feeling that leads me to the moment, I'll find the story and discover why it wants to be told. I've always known the power of the story, long before I understood why it moved me. But it has always moved me, whether in an essay or a speech or a movie, or even a song. I don't remember all the times that has happened, only that it has. What comes back to me always is a moment and a feeling. I write that sentence and right away I'm taken back to a day in high school nearly 50 years ago. And I'm trying to explain to my friend Joseph Gabriel why I need to get to the meaning behind the lyrics of a song by the Spinners. The song is Living a Little, Laughing a Little, and it's about a clown. But not really, it's the same way Smokey Robinson was singing about something else in The Tears of a Clown. Or Frank Sinatra was getting at something else when he sang Send in the Clowns. I'm sitting there with my friend Joe at McDonald 35 High School in New Orleans, and I'm being very sincere and way too earnest. And I'm saying, but Joe, what's going on in this clown's life? The Spinners sing it. Everyone at the food with his heart in his hand. Still, he can't quite understand that he's less than a man. Lost somewhere deep in his shell, there's an ember of pride. Watch how he tries hard to hide that he's dying inside. And then the hook. told Scarlett I was thinking about singing it myself, but opted to do something else. But this song has sent me inside myself as I sit there with Joe. I'm searching not just for what Tom Bell meant when he wrote the lyrics, but for why it is personally resonating so powerfully inside me that I need to talk to someone about it. I'm 14 years old and I'm asking Joe, what lie is this man living? Is it Smokey Robinson's clown? Just a man pining for the love of a woman he let get away? Is it Stephen Sondheim's clown, the one Sinatra is singing about, a story of a couple going through the ridiculous motions of pretending their marriage hasn't crumbled? I'm 14 and I'm wondering if this is the clown Martin Luther King Jr. alluded to in his last speech at the Mason Temple in Memphis when he quoted his friend Ralph Abernathy, who liked to talk about being beaten down, about the Black men who were scratching where they didn't itch and laughing when they were not tickled. I am 14 and I'm down in the depths of self-examination with the Spinners as my soundtrack, trying to figure out what this means for me and my life. And that is the moment when Joe says, come on, man, it's just a song. Why do you need to do all this analyzing? Can't you just enjoy the music? Scarlett invited me to come to you tonight and talk about the power of voice because she knows how much I love the personal essay. And if you've ever read her writing, lyrical, poetic, honest, you would know why I think Scarlett should be the one delivering tonight's message. But here I am, and here is my message. The power that resides in your writing is not yours. It belongs to the reader. It is not in your art, it's in the eyes of the beholders of your art. The greatest realization of your power arrives when a reader digests your story and it leads them to their own story, which they are then compelled to tell. I know you know what I'm talking about, but I haven't always understood it. I've always listened for the profound in song lyrics, in poetry, in novels and nonfiction and speeches, and in the language of a painting or a sculpture. And in the earliest days of doing personal writing, I thought it was my duty to find that memorable sentence or thought that would cause the reader to push back from the table to contemplate its profundity. I've had moments like that in reading the great writers and speakers who have inspired me and continue every day to make me want to tap ever deeper parts of my understanding so that I can approach their wisdom. Most days, their greatness just intimidates and discourages me, but I push on and aspire nonetheless. If you're a writer, you know this feeling. You're reading the stunning writing of Zora Neale Hurston as she builds to crescendo in her most famous novel, describing the hurricane that turns the story toward its tragic end, and you're noting the turns of phrase and the voice and dialogue and description, and you're thinking, I can do that. And then you hit the passage that summons the book's title. The wind came back with triple fury and put out the light for the last time. They sat in company with the others in other shanties, their eyes straining against the crude walls and their souls asking if God meant to measure their puny might against his. They seemed to be staring at the dark, but their eyes were watching God. That kind of writing makes me want to just close the laptop, give up writing, and go back to the piano to try to for the 50th time to learn the impossibly hard part of Clair de Lune, because that at least seems like something I could one day achieve. I feel the same sense of intimidation when I'm pushing hard to say something meaningful about the things that have been my focus for nearly 30 years, racial equity and the rivers and streams that lead to social justice. When I so much as dip a toe into that water, the writings of my heroes in the space whisper to me that I should put down the pen and step away from the pad, even as they push me into a well of introspection. Here is James Baldwin, whose words about the resilience of Black Americans were written in 1963 in his essay, The Fire Next Time, but they might easily be addressing today's disingenuous political campaigns against critical race theory and in favor of affirmative historical ignorance. I am proud of these people, not because of their color, but because of their intelligence and their spiritual force and their beauty. The country should be proud of them too, but alas, not many people in this country even know of their existence. And the reason for this ignorance is that a knowledge of the role these people played and play in American life would reveal more about America to Americans than Americans wish to know. Yes, yes, yes. That's what I wanted to say. Baldwin just said it first and better. I write in search of this muse, of his muse, so that I might be able to put that kind of insight under my byline. I want to tap the creative vein Ralph Ellison hit in Invisible Man when his nameless antagonist, after hundreds of pages of deep disillusionment, decides he has to rejoin a racist society. Perhaps that's my greatest crime, says this man. I've overstayed my hibernation since there's a possibility that even an invisible man has a socially responsible role to play. When I read that passage today, I find myself transported back to the library of the old Times-Picayune newspaper in New Orleans, hiding, disillusioned, worn down by the relentless choice between fighting with white colleagues just to get them to see the humanity of the city's Black people that was missing from their coverage, or suffering the insidious rot in my soul when I don't fight, when I don't play what the invisible man called his socially responsible role. I read Ellison and I find my story. There is the real power of the writer's voice, the power I find in the personal essay. It's in that intersection where the writer's story and the reader's story meet, emerge as the combined energy of two to become something even more powerful, something perhaps not even possible but for their meeting. I don't need to be Hurston or Baldwin or Ellison to greet you at that intersection. I just have to find my voice. I just have to find a moment. So here's one. In late 2018, it's late 2018 and my youngest son is applying for college. We're sitting at the dining room table poring over the many essays he has had to write. The whole process has changed since the last time one of his siblings did this 7 years ago. Then you wrote an actual essay, whole thoughts with transitions and narrative arc and clever kickers. Now it's a series of prompts and word count limits, no way to properly tell a story or deliver theme or voice, just passages, just answers. One application asks about a challenge he had to overcome. Another asks about a hard lesson he has learned in his life. They're new variations on old cliches. My son has been wondering how to play this. He has not had a difficult life. A stable home with 2 doting parents and a house in an upper middle class Tampa neighborhood. He has had wonderful, loyal friends, supportive siblings, a big, embracing extended family. He enjoys engineering and hates writing because God loves irony. And he has waited until the very end to finish the mini essays and submit himself to being edited by his father, which he swears is properly described as torture. He has cleverly converted a small conflict on a group project into a significant challenge he had to overcome, and talked about how he learned a hard lesson about leadership when he had to step in as captain on his soccer team. He is reaching, because word is that admissions officers love a good adversity story, and his greatest adversity through 17 years has been sports-induced asthma and AP calculus. We had talked months ago about race as an essay topic, about how he was the only Black child in his soccer team since the age of 7, about stupid things he'd heard people say in school, about the one time he told me that someone used the N-word with the hard ER, Dad, out on the soccer field, and how his teammates pummeled the kid for the rest of the game. We had mined that vein for a possible adversity essay and come up empty. Of our 5 children, I had talked the least with Noah about racism. I had not had the talk with him. I searched with intention for the elusive balance between raising a Black son to see the world as limitless possibilities while arming him for the America that Hurston, Ellison, and Baldwin endured, that my mother and father endured, that I had survived. I hammered into him from his earliest days that he was the reason for his success, that his greatness was there to be manifested, that he alone held the reins of his life. You got that A in science because you are a born scientist, son. You won that race because you worked the hardest, son. They voted you team captain because you are a natural leader, son. If that strategy pushed him toward arrogance, so be it. I figured if it was a fair hedge against all the ways this country would try to tell him that he was less than. I never talked to him about that, though. I had those conversations with his oldest siblings all the time. They'd come to work at the Poynter Institute when they were younger and sit in on my seminars, and they watched me lead conversations about racism in the community centers around St. Petersburg. They would talk with me about those conversations from the back seat on the way home. By the time Noah came along, I'd become an administrator and moved across Tampa Bay, so he rarely got to come to my office and never heard me speak publicly. Then I went to work for NPR and spent half of every week in Washington, D.C., or some other city. For all he knew, my job was to go to airports, have meetings, and work late on the computer. Now he is filling out college applications at the dining room table, and we are about to have a talk. Not the one about how he should behave if a police officer pulls his black Hyundai over. Not the one I had to have with his stepbrother, whose white grandmother once explained to him that Black people were better off because slavery saved them from poverty in Africa. Not the one I had to have with my oldest daughter, whose white computer programming teacher was ignoring the Black kids in his class of gifted students, and I needed her to know that his bigotry said nothing about her genius. Noah and I are about to talk because he has ended the last of his essay prompts with this thought: I know that I will have to work extra hard so that I can prove that Black students are as intelligent as white students. I am without words. Rage is rising inside of me. Most of it is aimed at me. Here I sit with this brilliant, beautiful, generous child whose high school grade point average is twice what mine was, and I was a pretty good student, and I still feel like a failure. How have I allowed him to believe for even a second that the intelligence and spiritual force and beauty that Baldwin saw in people like him is as invisible to those who choose affirmative ignorance as Ellison's protagonist was invisible to America. How did I not see that he was carrying around an irrational, impossible burden? How could it be that I had not taught him that no amount of studying and learning and proving would give him enough strength to lift a veil of racism tattooed onto the faces of too many Americans? I look at him and pray I won't have to explain the liquid rage blurring my vision. And I say, no, son, no. We live our lives in moments like these, small cosmic increments built one upon the other, like breaths, like heartbeats. They have integrity all their own, but their true power is not in the telling, but in the hearing. This is the moment when we do questions and answers, but I want to ask the first question. What did you hear? Where did you go? What story of yours has now met mine at that powerful intersection? You can let that question be rhetorical, or we can talk about it. Either way, let's talk.
Can I ask a question?
Please, Janice.
I am very, very curious to know, just very, very briefly, what your conversation was with your son.
Well, I would say without nearly the number of words that I just presented to you in that essay, I said to him, there's no way you can ever do that, and it's not your work.
I love that. I love that. And we should be teaching our children that.
Yeah.
They can't carry that burden.
No, and for all of my work and intentionality around framing for him this self, the sense that you have self-determination, the world still gets through. And that has never been an epiphany for me. I mean, I shouldn't say never. It has not been an epiphany for me in decades. I've known that you can't just wish away the things of society that you don't want your children to feel or hear. But it was considering the access that he had to us and our conversations as parents, it was still a surprise. And to just see it show up as we're sitting there doing an edit on an essay without ever having had the conversation that led to it, I felt this sudden urgency to just, grab a mallet and stamp out this idea right then and there as much as possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Janice, I would say that part of the reason for my reaction, I'm 63 years old. I might have been in my 40s. I might have been in my 50s when I finally understood and ingested that idea myself. And I'm damn certain that I don't want my children to take that long.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas, I'm going to read your comment out loud. While listening to your words, a fear tugged me about what kind of talk can I prepare our daughters for their future? How can I help them have open eyes, an open heart, and open mind? How can I protect them from the ignorance of sexism? That's what his words tugged at in my heart. And I would say, yeah, I think what the essay, any essay, will send you into your own version of the story. And if it's daughters and sexism versus Black sons and police shootings, we're winding up somewhere near the same place. And I think what I've tried to do as a parent and as an adult more and more is to speak out loud things that, you know, kind of lived inside of me unseen and unresolved. And it's hope that by doing that, at the very least, I spare my children or whoever I'm talking to the need to spend another day before they get there. It's like, you know that if you put your hand on a hot stove, it will burn you. You don't need to have your kids doing that to learn that lesson. Some things we can head off. And I imagine that if I had that worked out when I was in my 20s, all that energy and psychic space would have been occupied with more positive things. That's the way I look at it.
So how did you do it though? Like the essay had so much voice and passion, and it did help make a connection, and you transported a group of people from a writer's. When I read things, I like to look at how it is I can reproduce it or incorporate it. How can I do what you did with my own stories that draw?
I have to say, Scarlett, that I was wrestling in the writing of this, and I don't know how well I conveyed it, but wrestling with what has been the battle of the writer in me, and maybe also the teacher in me over the years, which is this idea that it all falls to me if I can't deliver that punch, then the writer can't have the experience that I need the reader rather can't have the experience that I need the reader to have. And I mean, the Taoist thinking would tell you that that's pretty significant hubris, among other things. But beyond that, it was understanding as a reader, really understanding what was going on as I was reading somebody else's work. And if you've, there's the experience that I'd like to refer to, which we have all had, is you're reading something really good, really pulling you in, whatever the story is. And then at some point you stop and you realize you've got to go back a page and a half and start reading again, because even though your eyes were on the words, something that happened a page and a half ago sent you inside. It sent you somewhere that's different from what was happening in a book. And that place is usually inside. It's usually your life, your story. And it happens in major ways, like, you're reading a novel. It happens as you're listening to a paragraph of somebody's essay, but it happens. And once you understand from the reader's perspective how powerful that is, that I connect to the book, and in a way that the author could never have intended or never have anticipated, because the author has no idea who I am and what part of my autobiography is about to intersect with hers. So what that frees you to do is just be as honest as you can, as complete as you can in the telling of the story, and just trust that when you do that, the magic is going to happen. You don't have to be the one to deliver it. You just have to deliver you as authentically as possible. Kathy, I wonder if you can say more And I don't know if you're able to unmute, say more about what you mean here.
Yeah, the men that we've served on Arkansas's death row have been in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day for at least 30 years, a lot of them. And they seem to have found the essence of themselves, so that when we write with them, I mean, some of our writers have gone completely insane. Some have been executed, but they seem to have found the essence of themselves, and they don't, and when they share that writing, which we've produced into staged readings and toured across the country, they don't speak to the injustice of the criminal justice system, although that's inferred a lot of times. What they speak to is how they have found themselves in spite of, or not, maybe in relation to being confined with themselves for all of this time. I was particularly drawn to that, and it's something that I would like to share with them as a success on their part. Although, I mean, I'm not sure if that makes any sense to you, but I found that very affirming for the men that we've served.
Yeah, and Kathy, I think that it's important to really embrace the idea that, even in the writing, they have an intention. They have an intention for you as the person who's reading it. And sometimes you might even speak directly to the reader in expressing that intention, but a lot of times it's also some intention that is the cumulative impact of all the things that they say. But there's utterly no control over how you receive it. And to me, the goal then isn't that, Thomas thinks about his daughters. I can't imagine that scenario because I don't know who he is or who they are. But my goal is to kind of deliver the feeling, the most honest version of that I can, and hope that in its sort of deepest sense is the thing that the reader receives. Whether that feeling winds up taking you in a different direction than what the man who wrote it intended, if at least the feeling gets all the way through, past all of your filters, past all of your defenses, whatever it is that might prevent you from feeling this thing, then that's success.
Yes. Yeah, and we feel that we feel that from them, and we don't filter any of that when we transcribe all of their work into a staged reading and then present that to audiences across the country with absolutely no filter, and they speak directly to how they got there, in ways that is in ways that they have spent years and years and years facing themselves in a stainless steel mirror, figuring out. Yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah. And, I'll just tell you, and I would love to be able to hear, I mean, it's a bit beyond my ability to comprehend what it's like to wake up in that cell. But it would be of interest to me, just as a writer and as a human, to know when the person started writing, if they knew where they would be when they were done. I have to tell you that as a writer, there are very few examples I could ever offer you in which I could say, yes, I knew where I was going. What I wrote here for this event started pretty much I'm writing about the power of a moment, and the only way that I can write about the power of a moment is to write a moment. And what I have come to trust above all things in writing is that if I can get started, that the story will tell me what it needs to say, and I might discover it 5 minutes in, or 500 words in. I might discover it after I've written the last paragraph. It really, there's no consistent way that it happens, other than that it doesn't happen when I write the first words. So even in summoning Baldwin or Ellison in a writing, and I've got King over to my right here at my desk, ready if I needed him. I've got Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou close at hand if I needed them. But I felt like I needed something from the writers that have inspired me to help me to figure out why I was writing this in the first place. And part of it, like I said to Thomas, is that I'm just wrestling with this notion that in reading great writing, it's my responsibility to deliver great writing because of the impact it had on me. And it's not until I think about the reason that it had impact on me, which isn't just that they wrote clever words, although I don't know, Baldwin, it might just be the words, but it isn't because they've written clever words. It's because when I hear the words, just like when I hear the lyrics to the Spinners song, the next thing that happens is that I go somewhere. And the power of it is what it summons in me when I get to that place. It isn't in the words themselves, they're just cold words on a page until that happens. And so trust to me is one of the biggest pieces of this, that you just go in and say, if I just can get started and trust, the story will deliver. That's kind of how I got through a lot of deadlines in college. Scarlett, go ahead.
I had a question about revealing oneself, because I've heard this over and over again, be authentic, boil it down to the essence of who you are, and be revealing. But all of that speaks to a certain amount of bravery, and also just being able to, you have to be kind of brave, especially nowadays, to just be out there like that. Do you have any tips for finding our authenticity? Or at this point, I feel like everybody says authenticity so much that it's inauthentic,
Yes. Look, I think, first of all, let me just speak to the Twitter, Insta, Facebook world. And I really do believe this. I'm not just being brash. You don't ever have to read that shit. Ever. And I chanced an opinion a couple of years ago about journalism's role in judging people and rendering judgment in print or on the air. And it was a really unpopular thing for a lot of people in Twitter, some of whom actually read the story, most of whom read the headlines or the opinions of the last person to tweet. And I understand that it got pretty ugly, but I didn't learn that by reading Twitter. I got it because people sent me notes saying, hey, did you see this in Twitter? I decided that I wasn't going to read it because that's not the world. And ultimately, it wasn't going to, you weren't going to alter in 140 characters or 280 characters, whatever it is, how I felt about something. You were going to have an actual conversation with me. And that wasn't going to ever happen on Twitter. So I think what gives you the bravery isn't your ability to take it. It's your decision not to. that makes you courageous here. And you know, if you're saying what you feel, and you're thoughtful, and you're not libeling people or whatever, then you survive it. People just don't chance it because they don't believe that. So first of all, enough of that. What I believe is that until you give up something in personal writing, and I don't know if I gave up everything in what I just read to you, but until you give up something, the reader has no reason to invest in what they're reading. And so you're just writing, and I'm just reading. And maybe we get to some surface level entertainment because you turned a couple of nice phrases, but we're not going anywhere with that. And I'm not going to go anywhere with what you've written if I don't feel you in the words. So I think, in personal writing, especially, the real governor you need is in making sure you don't say too much, because, I don't need to know all that. In an essay, the goal is to deliver exactly the amount of personal information that the person reading it needs in order to understand what you've written, and no more than that, because then it becomes just self-indulgent. So, what's the courage that you have to summon to provide an authentic feeling about something? And surviving it is less about some objective experience you're going to have, and more about how much you decide to engage with it. Is that getting at it, Scarlett?
Yeah, I think so. I was just, this is kind of like the thing that scares you, or is this, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think part of it is write the thing that scares you, but it's also digging and digging and digging until you say what you're actually trying to say. And I'll just give you kind of the inverse experience. I've been doing a lot of writing that has never seen the light of day. It sits in my laptop, and like yours, Scarlett. And I've been writing about my dad for too many years to even talk about, who he passed away in 2005. And I started writing about him the summer before he died. And it became something like a memoir that might one day grow up to be that. And I've been trying to kind of send it out to people and say, what do you think? What do you think? And at one point I sent one significant chapter to two people who have utterly nothing in common. One was a columnist, nationally syndicated, a real writer. She's a mensch of a teacher, and I knew that if she thought that I was messing up, she would say so. And the other I sent to a colleague at NPR who's never written anything, could teach a master's course in jazz and understanding jazz, but he wasn't a writer in that sense. And both of them came back with exactly the same feedback. They said, where are you in this? And I'm saying, what? I'm all over it. I use the word I every third sentence. What do you mean, where am I? I'm right there. And they said, no, you're on the surface of this. You are telling me about something that's happening, but I have no sense of you in this. And even as I'm telling you this story, I haven't figured out how to fix that, but I do understand exactly what they're telling me. And that's the challenge. The challenge is to dig and dig and dig into the thing you're telling me until it's maybe, you know, to use that old cliche, you're showing me instead of telling me. Maybe that's the thing that you've got to dig down to. It's not like, okay, tell me something painful or something embarrassing, although it might be both of those things. It is to tell me something true, at the bottom of the truth, you know, not at the point that you learned the lesson.
So how can we use this advice to sort of incorporate the theme of what the workshop today, incorporating race, diversity, and inclusivity in our writing, or in how we connect with underrepresented communities? How can we take this advice and extrapolate and go further than just our own writing, and help our communities connect in a broader sense?
Well, that's not hard. It's impossible. No, I guess what I would say is that in all of it, every piece of it, there's the kind of, it's, you know, to go back to the beginning of my remarks, it's the cellular piece of this, that when we can communicate with people at that level of understanding and that level of honesty, then we start connecting. And that's true whether we're talking about writing a passage or an essay, or whether you're just trying to sit with somebody in the community and express to them that you grasp what's happening in their lives. So, you know, I tell journalists all the time to strip away every euphemism, every bit of obfuscation that lives in your vocabulary when it comes to these difficult things, so that we are not talking about police involved shootings and, you know, inane constructions like that. That we're stripping it down and saying what we really mean, what we are really talking about, in the fewest and most direct words possible. And that especially applies to me when I'm talking about me to people on these issues. And you know, you're doing an essay, you can get a little lyrical, you can get a little flowery, but somewhere in there, you got to get all the way down to the ground and say what you're saying, or, you know, I start sniffing out your inauthenticity, and that's a bad outcome for any of us, whether you're a writer or an activist in a community or somebody who's working in social services. People need to believe that you see them fully and completely, and that's what you have to deliver. Kathy, I see your hand.
Yeah, I love that. I know when the very first time that we were on Arkansas's death row, 12 men out of the 34 that were on the row at the time met with us. And one of those men, Stacy, as we were talking or as we were writing, he wrote that he said, "I don't have a story to tell. I was chained to a truck at 6 years old and sold for a case of Kentucky bourbon and a carton of Winston cigarettes." And he was going to quit the class. And we thought that there was a story in that, but that was not the story, right? It was his story, and it was part of how he ended up on death row. But what he was really talking about, he stayed with us. We convinced him to stay with us for the time we were with him. But what he was really talking about we think was freedom, and how it might be found even on death row in order to find empowerment over the system. And he did that through his writing. It's easy. It was easy. It would have been easy for us to say, well, that's the story. Let's use that story. That's a great story. I mean, it's a horrible story, being chained to a truck, sold for a case of bourbon, but that really wasn't the story at all. It was the struggle to find freedom and all that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love, we one of my colleagues at Poynter years ago used to always say, but what's the story really about? Is this a story about my son? No. Is this a story about, writers? No. What's it really about? And the more you can reduce the answer to that question to a word, the better you're able to kind of focus on what you're doing. But here's what I would say to that anecdote that you just gave. There's a reason he told you about the truck and the moment. And I referenced this again. And this to me as a writer is like going out in on a search for treasure, and it's, or going out and drilling for oil, whatever your metaphor, and marking spots along the way. And when he mentions the truck, I put an X on that spot and say, I don't know where this one leads, but I do firmly believe that it leads somewhere. So as a writer, I take that moment, you start telling me a story, and whatever it is that it summons in me in that moment, when you ask me a question, whatever it is that it summons in me, I mark the spot. And sometimes that becomes the lead of your story. Sometimes it's the end of your story. Sometimes it's 2 sentences as a parenthetical in your story. And sometimes it's the whole story. But if it came up, then what you know for sure is that it's a trail that you can follow, and it will lead you to the story. So, I think of my moment with Joe Gabriel in high school, and I know that it's leading me somewhere. And I can remember enough about the moment, the time, to know that there are a couple of other places we could have gone. I could have gone with that story, but if I write a sentence and it says, music moves me, I know where I'm going to wind up at some point in the story, and maybe it's not at the beginning, but like I said, it is immediate clue of relevance. And what I just love about writing is that I can start off on that journey and have no idea where it's going to wind up. And almost like a spectator while I'm writing, like, oh, that's where we were going. Oh, this is very cool. And even I get a little bit of the delight of discovery that comes with that. Scarlett and I were talking before we started about the differences in the ways that we process as human beings. And I am not a linear person. I cannot say, you start at the beginning and you write to the end. I just start where I mark the spot. And then sometimes I write up, and then sometimes I write down. I write sideways. It's not dictated by anything but the experience of writing itself.
We only have a few more minutes. Does anybody have any questions? If not, I'm going to take over time because it's my way. So I know that we have several creatives of color in our workshop today, and they're very talented, wonderful people. Some of them are writers and educators, musicians, people who have enormous voices, but often they just don't hear or themselves or present themselves very often. unless you really listen. And I was hoping that maybe you had some advice for those creatives in particular.
You know, I keep thinking that, Scarlett, that I've got to start writing down the moments in my life when I realized something that I wished I had known a lot sooner. And, you know, some of the discoveries I feel even a little embarrassed about, because it's like, really, Keith, you hadn't figured that out by now? But one of the things I think when it comes to your voice that I've just kind of concluded over time is that the thing that I mean, there's a universe of fear, so I'm not going to try to account for them all, but among the things that we fear, just like me with reading Baldwin, is that, you know, we're not up to the task, we're not up to that, or that in expressing ourselves in the space, that there's somebody out there who's better than we are, and therefore, you know, better to kind of sit on the sidelines or just stay in the shadows and not create the opportunity to learn that they're better. And the thing that I have just learned over and over and over again over time, and I sometimes even have to like remind myself of in the moment when I'm getting ready to speak to a group of people or teach a course or anything, is that sitting there right now, wherever I am, are a bunch of people with exactly the same insecurities. That for every day I have spent with imposter syndrome, there are any countless numbers of people sitting in front of me who right now are waiting to experience it. And that's a sad state of affairs in some ways, but it is absolutely a liberating thought, that, you know, my words are as good as anybody else's words, that my ideas are as good as anybody else's ideas, and that the difference between me and the next person might just be that they figured this out before I did. So, you know, it isn't as simple as saying it and speaking it into existence, but, you know, it's like a lot of things. You know, the lesson I had to deliver to my son. I'm done wondering whether I figured it out. I figured that one out. I'm not sitting around wondering whether, in fact, we could disabuse a racist of their racist views by proving that we were better. You know, we had a whole president who thought he could do that. The lessons learned, I don't have to learn it a second time. And I think that that's one of those things that if I could just like package it and hand it to someone, you're good right now, good enough today, that would be the gift I would have given to myself if I could have in my 20s and 30s. And it's the gift I would give to anybody today. Thank you, Janice.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I have gone over time. If there's anyone who has any questions, now's your last chance before I sort of wrap things up. You can drop it in the chat or raise your hand. And thank you so much for coming. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to drop into the chat my email. You know, I will say I get a lot, so I'm not always fast, but I'm always going to respond.
Yeah. Okay. I should turn the video back off. Thank you very much for coming. And I guess if you're interested in any of our other GetSmART workshops, we have several really good ones coming up, including tomorrow with Garbo Hearn, and she's going to show us how to package art and ship it. So anyway, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here. And I guess we'll see each other later.
Hey, thank you, Scarlett. So I'll get you on the calendar so we can talk writing.
Okay. Bye, guys. Have a good evening.
Bye.